Welcome to this Contact online learning session focusing on positive communications for forums. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Wendy Davey. I'm a freelance communications consultant and a contact associate supporting parent-carer forums across the country, with their communications mainly, but also sometimes with governance. And in the past, I've been a parent-carer trustee for my local forum, and I've also volunteered and worked through a range of forum roles in my own local area. So I've got a good, solid understanding of parent-carer participation and co-production, how it works and why it matters. So what are we going to cover today? I'm just going to run through for you so you've got a broad outline of the shape. I'm going to start with some general observations about positive communications. Sometimes forums do need to put out the focus onto a negative story, and often it can work well when talking to professionals if we explain why things aren't so great. So used appropriately, negative messages can be really impactful, but we're not dealing with the negative today. We're focusing on taking a positive approach and how that can be just as powerful. We'll spend a short time thinking about getting the marketing basics right, thinking about quick and simple ways to plan and structure communications that your forum puts out. I'll let you have some practical hints and tips about generating and sharing positive content, and there's going to be lots of signposting so you can check how others are doing it. I haven't got the time, unfortunately, to go into lots of detail, but you can always learn from other charities and non-profits. Effective communications don't have to cost a lot of money, but they can be really heavy in terms of time. So we're going to ask the question, who does the work? And we're also going to think about risks, pros and cons of putting out positive messages, if there are any, and then I'll try and tie everything up at the end. And before I go on, I know that many of you come with different levels of communications and marketing experience. So for some of you, some of the things I say you'll already know about. For others, perhaps what I say will raise questions and ideas, but I do hope that you'll all take away something positive from today's online session. So finding something positive to say can be a challenge if you're a parent-carer, even at the best of times. And here we all are living in the middle of a global pandemic. Times are tough. It probably feels harder than ever to put out messages that are confident and upbeat, but it matters that we do, because all the evidence right now is that people are desperate to feel that things will get better, and people want to hear positive messages and personal stories that they can relate to. I don't have time to talk about all the different ways we can put out upbeat messages in this short session, so I thought it would be more useful to present you with some information, hints and tips around two quick and easy ways to start doing it: personal stories and case studies. Connecting through telling personal stories is a powerful way to reach out and engage parent-carers and recruit new members. And case studies are a great way to evidence achievements, not just to local parent-carers, but also to partners and other agencies, groups and networks. Let's start by considering the psychology underpinning the very good reasons for building positive personal storytelling into your communications plans. All the evidence is that people use emotions rather than information to evaluate organisations. And research shows that people have a real physical and psychological response when they see an inspiring video. So if just looking at cute pictures of kittens on TikTok can have powerful cognitive effects, imagine the impact an emotionally inspiring story might have, and how those feelings are more likely to carry over into action. You can go online and check out how other non-profits are using personal stories to inspire. And I've given you 2 links here at the bottom of this slide. If you go to the Diabetes UK Your Stories webpage, you will find a well-constructed form inviting people to give their personal stories. And if you go to Rare Disease UK, you will see that they have published guidelines for their storytellers, which are interesting to take a look at. You really don't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch. Lots of other non-profits are already doing it, and you can learn from them. The same thing goes in relation to case studies. You can take a look, for instance, at the Disabled Children's Partnership and the messages that they put out this month, announcing that the government is giving an extra £30 million for short breaks for families with disabled children. They've really cleverly claimed this piece of positive news for themselves. They've given lots of information about how it's their move, the Disabled Children's Partnership, along with others who have campaigned for this funding, who have managed to grab this piece of success. They've used a good bit of news basically to raise awareness of their own success and the work that they do. So just imagine what will happen if your forum creates a similar case story on the back of a case study on the back of a good news story. It'll grab the attention of people, it'll enhance the forum's credibility and help build respect and partnerships with other stakeholders. And this might be a good point to mention that I'm really well aware that forums don't campaign, and that increasingly what a lot of us are seeing at the moment is forums all over the country being challenged by campaigning groups who don't really understand the work that forums do and why it matters. By providing positive case studies full of clear analysis and results, forums can help fend off challenge from alienated individuals and groups. So a forum might say, look, we don't campaign, but the case studies we create and gather are available to you on our website. The material might be interesting to you, take a look, let's keep a dialogue going. You can see how the Down Syndrome Association promotes accessible but factual information about the success of one of their projects by going to their WorkFit page, which looks at the way that they have matched people with Down syndrome with employers and employment. But taking a positive approach is about so much more than simply telling one upbeat story or listing successes in an annual report. It's about being intentional about what you do. And by that, I mean, it's about planning and resourcing and weaving messages through your communications activities in an ongoing way. Getting the basics right is the best way to ensure that your positive ideas reach people in the way that you intend them to. So as just before we slip on to the next slide, I was just going to bring your attention to that link there to HubSpot at the bottom. So HubSpot is a platform which is free at entry level and gives loads of great marketing and customer service advice, lots of templates, lots of guides about how to do things. And if there is someone in your team at your forum who's interested in pulling down that type of information, then it's always worth taking a look at HubSpot. But we don't have HubSpot with us today. So I'm going to spend a few moments explaining what I mean in a little bit more detail when I say let's get the basics right. So you want something to change and you want to use positive communications to make that change happen. How do you do that in a quick and easy but planned way? So firstly, I would start thinking about the 6 questions: why, who, how, where, when, and what. I'd start by asking why, and I do that in a smart way. And most of you probably already know that SMART is an acronym for making something specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timed. So let's apply a real life example to how we might ask why. We might say, let's be specific about what we want to do. We want to increase membership by publishing positive stories to engage parent carers and get them to join us. Let's make sure we can measure that. We want to increase membership by 5%. We have 500 members, so that means we need 25 new members to join us. Is that attainable? Well, imagine that you know that you have 5,000 parent carers living in your local area, then it is reasonable to expect a conversion rate of 3 parent carers a month, say. Are we being realistic? Well, yes. We know that parent carers engage through listening to stories about lived experience, and we have the capacity to publish, say, 1 personal story a month. So as far as timing is concerned, we know that we can reach our goal of increasing membership by 5% within 9 months. And now you have a simple workable plan and a goal that can be communicated and understood or challenged by everybody. And only then, once you've completed that first stage of planning, you can move on to give a general shape to the content you need to create. So you're not actually getting down to the specifics of the content, but you're starting to think more generally. And we're going to take ourselves through those other 5 remaining who, how, where, when, and what questions to do that. Who are we talking to? Because depending who you're talking to, it depends how you want to frame and convey your messages. And it also means that you're not saturating people with irrelevant communications. If you haven't started to think about segmenting your audiences yet, you could begin simply by having a discussion at a steering group or committee meeting about what you think the differences are between parent carers who belong to your forum and parent carers who haven't yet subscribed or become members. Professionals, the media, local councillors, school governors, how are they different from each other, and how might you speak to them differently? And will you speak to them in a formal or informal tone of voice? Typically, parent carers appreciate a more informal tone of voice because they perceive it to be more friendly. And things like case studies and factual reports might call for a more formal approach. Think about where you will be putting your messages out. When will you say what you've got to say? And again, you want to plan that. You want to map out forum activities in line with perhaps your strategic priorities, as well as more general landmarks such as national awareness days and local events, and put them all into a calendar with a timeline, plotting when it will be best to say what you want to say. And finally, what will your content be and how are you going to generate it? We're going to start looking at those questions now, and we're going to start thinking first about tracking what you do. Tracking your activities throughout the year proves the value of your work. You can include parent carer statistics, such as the increase in subscriber numbers month on month, or how many active members you have working as parent carer representatives. And you can log organisational achievements, so new initiatives, outreach work, focus group, meetings, consultations, and so on. Evidencing successful outcomes helps in all sorts of ways, with the things we're talking about here, but also with things like grant monitoring, annual reports, funding bids and pitches. And if you're struggling to imagine how you might find the time to keep on top of tracking things in that way, you can watch Contact Associate Ruth Hobbs' online learning session about how using technology can help you run your forum, and you've got a link to that there at the bottom of the screen, and they're both taking you to the same place. Bit.ly link is just nice and short for you. And people do ask how they might, one of the questions we've had is around this: how might we track what we do in the most effective way? And I think a lot of forums simply use Excel or even a template in Word to do that. I can point you in the direction of a platform called Lamplight, and there's been a really recent online learning session about Lamplight, which is entitled Let's Go Digital, and sits on the Parent Carer Forum resources page. And I know that there are quite a few forums now in England who are using Lamplight. It's a sort of CRM and digital platform which can be made bespoke, which can be tailored to the needs of your individual forum. So it's always worth going and having a look at that. So let's move on now from tracking what you do to the other key thing that I'm really going to encourage you to do, and that's to create a digital resources library or toolkit. Track what you do in pictures, take photos of everything you do, remembering to gain consents from people who feature. Build a digital library of free to download and royalty-free inspiring images. And I've given you a URL there taking you to Pixabay, which is a platform which does offer images and you want to make sure these images are not just free to download, but also royalty-free. That means free when you use them. And Pixabay does offer that. You just want to be careful that they don't launch you off into subscription services such as iStock or Shutterstock, which are paid for picture libraries. They have a tendency to do that. If you're going to go to Pixabay, make sure you stay in Pixabay. Another thing that's helpful is to teach yourself about Creative Commons, and I've given you a link there to creativecommons.org. Creative Commons images come down with any Google search and are available free to use through a variety of uses. You just need to understand how to identify them and what the copyright is for those images that you do identify. So go to creativecommons.org to find out a bit more about that. Another thing that's helpful is, and many of you will already use Canva. Canva are great at providing templates for infographics and other things like case studies and statements, things that you can create which have got a visual element and which you can use again and again. And I missed out there building a digital library of your own moving image resources. Encourage people to tell their own positive stories, send you their quotes and sound bites, short videos, ideally no longer than 45 seconds at the most. And don't forget that you can produce videos in different languages if you have local communities who don't speak English as a first language. And you can also pull down moving image content from some free or low-cost platforms, Canva again, or Adobe are two that I might use. Okay, so that's quite a lot about how to gather your resources there. And I'm going to move on to thinking about creating and generating the positive stories themselves. And we're going to start with a focus on personal stories before moving on to case studies. Our brains are hardwired to think, learn and act most effectively through stories. We dream in stories and we find stories everywhere we look in the media. Even the news is made up of people's stories. And that's because personal stories create a connection to the audience and lead to a deeper understanding. And we've already touched on that and the psychology underpinning that. We can tell a single story many times from different angles, or we can just tell it from one angle. So it's worth having a think about, if you've got a goal that you want to achieve, do we want one person to give their story about this, or one case study, or do we want several people to say how they have experienced something? So start off by just thinking generally about the type of stories you want to focus on. Ask yourself what your goal is. Have you planned around what you're going to do? We've touched on that already. So we are hard on ourselves, and we tend to look at what didn't work or get done rather than what did. And if your forum or your steering group is struggling a little bit with really getting their head around it, a useful exercise might be to spend 10 minutes together, each person thinking about one positive thing that belonging to the forum has helped them achieve in their own life or that of their family. Of course, if you find somebody who's really struggling to frame things positively, you can always signpost them to reputable online resources such as the NHS 5 Steps to Mental Wellbeing webpage. And again, just to step aside for you here, once again, I've shortened that rather long URL for you using bit.ly. And if you don't know about bit.ly, it's free. You just go to bit.ly.com, type in a long URL, and it'll churn you out a shorter version. You can, I think, also churn out a version which makes sense. So rather than 3A GKCQC, you can ask for it to say something like NHS Wellbeing. But I think that bit might be a paid for bit. You can always go out, check that out for yourselves. So we're going to now keep our attention on personal stories, and we're just going to reinforce some thinking around who tells the story. I'm not going to take too long here because we've touched on it, but you can tell your own story about your forum and what motivates you. You can encourage parent carers to tell their positive stories of what they do for the forum and how a forum success has impacted them. You can suggest a tone of voice. For instance, you could say, tell us simply in your own words, so that it is more of an informal style. You would want to say how long you want the written or video story to be. And again, I've given you lots of links to check out how others are doing that. Don't forget that you can ask professionals to tell how working with the forum has changed their perspective too. And I will never forget being in a meeting when a professional had a light bulb moment around why funding an iPad or tablet for a non-verbal child might be a relatively cheap and successful way of providing assistive technology to that child. They said that they never did that because they thought that it was a luxury and not something that was necessary. But when they heard parents talking about what it really meant and the difference it made, you could just see that totally overturned their thinking. So what I would say is just imagine how if you did get that professional to do a 45-second video or agree to be referenced in a case study, how that might help other people, other professionals, parent carers, and even alienated campaigning groups start to understand how important parent carer participation is and how it can make a difference. And I do feel quite passionate about how telling personal stories can make a difference. And there's 2 links here that I'd really urge you to take the time to go to. Amy Cuddy weaves her own personal story into a TED talk about body language, which is interesting in itself if you haven't watched it before. And you can also listen to Dustin Lance Black talk about how story is the most effective way to change hearts and minds by going to that YouTube link. Neither of these links take you to a subject matter that is directly about parent care forums or the work they do, but I think they're really translatable and interesting videos to watch. I recommend them. So sharing personal stories can stir up surprising amounts of emotion. And it's really important to ensure that people giving their stories feel comfortable and well supported as they do so. And not just them, but also their families and their children. So not everyone's thoughts and feelings always collide. And you want to make sure that everyone is happy that the story is going out. You might want to identify someone to facilitate and signpost contributors, but just make sure that that person isn't expected to actually support them themselves. They haven't been skilled up or supervised to do that. So really what they need to be doing is signposting elsewhere. For instance, we've got at the bottom there a link to a Mind webpage which lists helplines and listening services. Contact actually provides forums with access to a forum assistance programme of wellbeing and mental health support through an organisation called CIC, and that's their little green leaflet there on the side of this slide. If you don't know about CIC and the type of support it can give to members of your forum, then you can always check with your regional advisor. They'll put you in the right direction. There's a lot that we could say here. Again, time is too short. It's important to be clear about how stories will be stored and shared, what consents are being given, and the rights contributors have to withdraw their information. Making clear to people that although you could stop promoting their personal story, once it's out there, and you can't stop it on its journey, online journey. Being aware that some people might be happy to share a story on social media, whilst others might not want to go online, but they might be happy to talk at a meeting or a conference about their story, or about a case study. So just be very aware around all of those transparency and support issues, and spend a little bit of time thinking them through. Yeah, you can invite, you could also think about perhaps scheduling some sessions, so where potential storytellers can come together, think together about ground rules around telling their stories, maybe offer, if budgets allow, some training around telling personal stories and developing communication skills. That's quite a lot about personal stories, so I'm going to move on now to case studies. I won't spend as long on case studies as I did on personal stories. A descriptive case study is an in-depth study of one person, group, or event designed to understand a situation better. It might also help others make a decision about how to do things in a similar case. And really, writing a case study isn't complicated. All you need to do is choose a situation you want to write about, gather as much information as possible about the project and say how it was implemented, and analyse what worked well, and say why the forum's input was essential to the success of the project. And right back there near the beginning of the presentation, I talked about the Disabled Children's Partnership and how brilliantly they had done that. If, as we've already mentioned, you are one of those forums that's really struggling with capacity and you're thinking, we'd love to do it, but we just don't have the time or the resources to do it right now, you can see how Contact houses forum success stories on its own website, and there's a link here. And there's nothing to stop you starting off by simply signposting visitors to your website to the contact success stories page. But if you are going to crack on, then let's just finish off by thinking how and where you might publish your own positive messages, stories, and case studies. So from a communications point of view, your website ideally is the hub of everything that you do. Everything else springs out of your website. And I know some of you won't have that integration, but as far as you can, you want to try and follow that model. I would suggest creating a web page to invite and house your contributor stories, and another web page to hold your case studies. We've talked a lot about using visual, still and moving images and infographics to add emotional resonance to what you do, and to encourage visitors to spend more time looking at and hopefully sharing your content. And there's another link here to Mind, to their Your Stories webpage, which is, I think, a good one and worth taking a look at. So as far as social media is concerned, it's, for many of you, going to be the main raft of putting out your messages. And the pandemic has shifted people's online behaviours. So we're finding a lot more people working or spending time in the home, and a lot of them are spending a lot more time using social media. So looking through the various platforms and websites I use, everyone is saying that 2022 is a good time to begin to explore posting personal stories as short form video content on Instagram stories, YouTube, TikTok and Facebook live streams. And again, I'm trying to be realistic here. You may think, oh my goodness, that's overwhelming. We can't do all of that. And if that is what you're thinking, then I would still say it's worth starting off just doing one, and that one would be Facebook. I know a lot of people are migrating away from Facebook, but still the majority of parent carers at this time will have access to and will use, at least as part of their social media, Facebook. So if you're going to start with one, start with Facebook. Keep it professional, be intentional. Don't confuse planned personal story output with personal posts. And again, what I've seen a bit, looking at people's the social media forum posts from forums, is that completely understandable over 2 years of COVID, and people dropping away from forums, and there's maybe 2 or 3 people left trying to manage it. Things have got, in some instances, a little bit tangled up between what is forum post and what is a personal post. So if you can, just have a think about that and start to pull back a little bit if that's something that you recognise. Not everyone will be doing it, but if it's something that you recognise. HubSpot, who we've mentioned, recently reported that the best times to post on Facebook are now Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays from 10 till 11 AM. But that may be different in your area. It may be different for parent carers. It may be that 9:30 is a good time to post after people have dropped their children off at school. So you do need to use your own analytics to check out the best times to post wherever you are. What I'd say is don't post too often if you want to keep your followers. 1 post a day is more than enough, and ideally you'll only be posting a few times a week. You know yourselves that if you are in a group or following an organisation that's just inundating you with posts, you're gonna unlike or unfollow them. Another thing that I see is that lots of forums are posting shares from other relevant support organisations, and that's fine. You do want to do that. But at the same time, make sure you're also talking about the work of your forum in every 4th or 5th post Tell something positive that you have done. Otherwise, you do risk being seen as a support organisation rather than having your own identity as a forum that is listening to the collective voice. Very quickly then, e-news. We're going to move on. E-news is important to integrate it into your plans. You can apply everything we've already covered to e-news, including asking who your audience is. Is this an internal update, or is it going to subscribers or members, or is it going to parent carers who aren't yet members? And what are the differences in the types of things you want to say? Can you make your e-news visual? Here we've got an infographic that I pulled down from Canva and populated with some text and images. It's easy and quick to do if you've got someone on your team that uses Canva or is interested to find out how to do that. Moving on again, other ways that you can get these messages out. You could create a blog, and if you're struggling for what to write about, perhaps a good prompt will be to imagine how you'd like the world or a particular issue to be. Say how it will be once you've achieved that aim, and follow up with your plans for getting there and why people should care, why it matters. Don't forget to take your stories out to local news media if they're local, personal, and if they're timely. They won't be interested otherwise. Don't be put off if you reach out and you get calls back from advertising salespeople. Don't buy advertising space. It is possible to get free editorial into the local media. You just have to be persistent, and you have to keep on following up on your stories. And a third thing to think about is face-to-face. Just because we've talked about writing or videoing our personal stories doesn't mean that we can't also present them along with case studies face-to-face, either at conferences or meetings. Oh yes, at the bottom there we've got a link to another HubSpot page about blogs and strategy and how to write them, which is perhaps interesting to someone who hasn't written a blog before but is interested to do it for their forum. We're quite near the end now. I'm just going to finish off with a couple more thoughts for you. Firstly, who does the work? So if you are fortunate enough to have a reasonably sized team of members on your steering group or volunteering for you, think about giving people clear designated responsibilities. For instance, you could have someone as a social media coordinator, someone writing a termly blog, another person coordinating personal stories, and another person taking responsibility for creating those case studies. If you don't have lots of people to rely on, then consider collaborating with border forums or other non-campaigning local SEND organisations, special educational needs and disability organisations, to spread the workload. Encourage everyone you liaise with to send you their positive quotes, stories, photos and short video clips. Encourage subscribers and members to raise awareness of the forum by sharing any content you post to their friends and other sites with appropriate hashtags and joining links. And here's a right one here for Bitly. That is all one long URL, which I've shortened, takes you both take you to the same place. And that's quite a useful bit of information, what are hashtags and how to use them on social media, based within the Wix website. So Wix, for those of you that don't know, is a free at entry platform enabling you to create, design and manage your website, and it includes lots of add-ons and integrations like Facebook and MailChimp. It's really the main contender for WordPress. Lots of people like WordPress. I prefer Wix. But anyway, that will take you to some information about hashtags. So are there risks to putting out lots of positive communications? Not really significant risks, as long as you're sensible. I mean, even if you don't have a baby kitten on your payroll, you're going to be okay putting out positive stories as long as you're authentic. If you're not authentic, if you make them up, you risk losing people's goodwill. If you fail to make sure that people who share their stories or images aren't supported properly in the way we've talked about, you risk alienating contributors, and that could be damaging. And you want to ensure that you have GDPR protections in place. And we've got some links there to the government's data protection information and also to Community Matters. There's a web link and an email address. If you don't know about Community Matters and you want to know more about how forums can access free accessible support, advice and guidance around GDPR, plus lots more legal and technical advice and information from Community Matters, you can contact your local regional advisor, and I'm sure they'll point you in the right direction. And do remember to control how you gather, store and share information. Make sure you moderate it before it goes out. And remember that out of date information and messages aren't positive messages. So at this online learning session, we've explored how positive communications are a powerful way to raise awareness, engage parent carers, enhance credibility and build confident relationships with other stakeholders. We've thought about the psychology underpinning the power of telling positive stories, about how getting communications basics right reinforces the impact of everything you publish, how to generate and share content, and how to support contributors. And we've just touched on possible risks and who does the work. I really want to thank you for coming along to this online learning session and listening to what I have to say. And now it's your turn. So I'm going to encourage you to get out there and say something positive.